Turns out humans are terrible at knowing when to quit. The ground shook as the massive alien war machines stomped across the scorched earth. Their towering forms cast long, ominous shadows over the battlefield. The Ecker, an advanced warrior race from a distant star, had landed with the confidence of predators, certain of an easy kill. They had scouted this planet for years, understanding its resources, its weaknesses, and, most importantly, the psychology of its dominant species, or so they thought. Commander Keenox stood at the forefront, his four eyes scanning the horizon. His blue-gray skin shimmered under the harsh sun, and his mandibles clicked in anticipation. This was supposed to be a swift victory. The humans, with their primitive weapons and fragile bodies, would surely scatter at the sight of the Ecker war machines. They had seen it before on countless worlds. Fear was their greatest ally. But here, on this desolate plain of shattered earth and broken dreams, things were not proceeding according to plan. The human forces were not running. They stood their ground, rifles ready, eyes resolute. The front line, a ragtag assembly of soldiers from various nations, stared down the advancing alien war machines with a mix of grim determination and defiant fury. Their leader, Captain Mark Briggs, a hardened veteran with a face carved from stone, barked orders with unwavering confidence. "Hold the line. Don't give them an inch." Briggs' voice was a rallying cry, cutting through the cacophony of war. Keenox's translator device interpreted the humans' words. He couldn't comprehend why these creatures didn't flee. His kind had assumed that a show of overwhelming force would break their spirits, yet here they stood, ready to fight, ready to die. A sudden barrage of plasma fire erupted from the Ecker front lines, searing the air with intense heat and deadly precision. The human soldiers ducked and weaved, returning fire with a steady rhythm, their ballistic weapons far less advanced, but lethal nonetheless. Explosions rocked the ground, sending debris and body parts flying in a grotesque ballet of death. A young soldier, Private Jackson, barely 18, and with the ink still wet on his enlistment papers, fired his rifle with trembling hands. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest, but he refused to let fear overtake him. Beside him, Sergeant Morales, a grizzled veteran with a thick beard and a scar that ran the length of his cheek, shouted encouragement. "Stay focused, Jackson. Aim for the joints and eyes. That's where they're vulnerable." Jackson nodded, swallowing hard, and adjusted his aim. He squeezed the trigger, sending a burst of bullets toward an advancing Ecker. The alien's armor deflected most of the shots, but one found its mark, striking an exposed joint. The creature stumbled, and Jackson fired again, this time hitting the alien's eye. The Ecker screeched in pain, its blue blood splattering the ground as it collapsed. Keenox watched in disbelief as more of his soldiers fell. These humans were tenacious, ferocious even. They fought with a primal intensity that he had never encountered before. His kind valued strength and honor in combat, but these humans fought with something else, something harder to quantify, but undeniably potent: desperation. Human artillery opened up from the rear lines, hurling shells with deafening booms. The explosions tore through the Ecker ranks, sending limbs and machinery flying. The alien war machines, once thought invincible, now appeared vulnerable under the relentless assault. Captain Briggs surveyed the battlefield, his mind racing. The Ecker were formidable, but they were not invulnerable. He had studied their tactics, their strengths, and their weaknesses, and he had one advantage they did not. He knew the heart of a human soldier. Mortar teams, concentrate fire on the center. Riflemen, keep up the pressure. Show these bastards what it means to mess with Earth, he commanded. A chorus of affirmations followed, and the human soldiers redoubled their efforts. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. The screams of the dying, both human and alien, formed a macabre symphony of war. Keenox's confidence wavered. His forces were taking heavy losses, far more than anticipated. The human stubborn refusal to retreat or surrender defied all logic. It was as if they drew strength from the very act of resisting. In the midst of the chaos, A squad of Ecker infantry broke through the human lines, charging toward a bunker that served as a command post. Briggs saw them coming and knew he had to act quickly. "Bravo, team, on me!" he shouted, grabbing his rifle and sprinting toward the breach. A dozen soldiers followed, their boots pounding the earth. They met the Ecker head-on in a brutal clash of flesh and steel. Briggs fired point-blank into an alien's face, the recoil jarring his shoulder. He swung the butt of his rifle into another's head, feeling the crunch of exoskeleton give way. His men fought with savage intensity, matching the alien's blow for blow. Private Jackson found himself face-to-face with an Ecker warrior, its mandibles clicking menacingly. He raised his rifle, but the alien swatted it aside, sending him sprawling. The Ecker loomed over him, raising a bladed arm for the kill. Jackson scrambled in the dirt, his fingers closing around a fallen knife. As the blade descended, he thrust upwards with all his might, driving the knife into the alien's throat. Blue blood gushed over him as the Ecker gurgled and fell. Briggs and his men pushed the remaining aliens back, reclaiming the ground inch by bloody inch. The Ecker squad was decimated, their corpses littering the battlefield. Panting, covered in dirt and blood, Briggs looked around. His soldiers were battered but unbroken. They had held the line. Keenox, observing from a distance, felt a rare emotion stir within him: doubt. These humans, with their relentless spirit and refusal to yield, were not like any enemy he had faced before. They were proving to be a formidable adversary. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the battlefield, both sides took stock of their losses. The war was far from over, but today, the humans had shown their true mettle. And for the first time, the Ecker commander wondered if they might have underestimated their enemy. Night fell over the battlefield, a quiet blanket that muffled the sounds of the wounded and dying. The eerie silence was punctuated by the occasional distant explosion or the sharp crack of a rifle, reminding both humans and Ecker that the war was far from over. Stars twinkled overhead, indifferent to the carnage below. Captain Briggs and his men huddled around a small makeshift command post, their faces illuminated by the pale glow of portable lamps. They were weary but resolute, their eyes filled with grim determination. The day's victory had bolstered their spirits, but they knew the Ecker would return, likely stronger and more determined. "All right, listen up," Briggs said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "We've got a short window to regroup and resupply. Intel suggests the Ecker are amassing their forces for a counterattack at dawn. We need to be ready." Sergeant Morales leaned forward, his eyes hard. "What about reinforcements? Any word from HQ?" Briggs shook his head. "Communications are still down. We're on our own for now. But we can't rely on help coming. We have to hold this position no matter what." Private Jackson, bandaged and bruised but still determined, spoke up. "Sir, do we have any plan to disrupt their buildup? Maybe a strike to slow them down?" A thoughtful silence fell over the group. Briggs rubbed his chin, contemplating. "It's risky, but it might buy us the time we need. Morales, take a squad and see if you can infiltrate their lines. Plant charges on their supply depots, anything that looks important. Make it hurt." Morales nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Consider done, sir." The squad moved out under the cover of darkness, slipping through the shattered landscape like ghosts. The Ecker encampment loomed ahead, a hive of activity as the aliens prepared for their next assault. Morales and his men moved cautiously, avoiding patrols and using the terrain to their advantage. Every step was a calculated risk, every shadow a potential threat. As they neared the supply depot, Morales signaled for the men to spread out. They placed charges on fuel tanks, ammunition stores, and key structures. The tension was palpable, every second feeling like an eternity. Just as they finished setting the last charge, a patrol of Ecker soldiers rounded the corner. The humans froze. The aliens' glowing eyes scanned the area. For a moment, it seemed they might pass without noticing, but then a shout rang out and chaos erupted. "Move, move!" Morales shouted, firing his weapon as the charges detonated. The night sky lit up with a series of blinding explosions. The shockwaves tore through the alien camp. Ecker soldiers were thrown through the air, and structures collapsed in a cascade of fire and debris. Morales and his men sprinted back toward their lines, pursued by furious Ecker. Bullets and plasma bolts zipped past, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning metal and flesh. Private Jackson stumbled, a searing pain in his leg as an alien round found its mark. He gritted his teeth and kept moving, helped along by a fellow soldier. Back at the human camp, Briggs watched the explosions with a mix of satisfaction and concern. The mission had been a success, but now they had to deal with the fallout. The Ecker would be enraged and desperate for revenge. Dawn broke with a bloody sunrise, casting a red hue over the battlefield. The Ecker launched their counterattack as expected, but the humans were ready. Trenches had been dug, fortifications strengthened, and every soldier stood prepared to fight to the last breath. The alien war machines advanced once more, their metal feet pounding the earth. Plasma cannons opened fire, sending deadly beams toward the human lines. Briggs stood at the forefront, his rifle at the ready, his voice a steadying force amidst the chaos. Hold your fire until they're in range. Make every shot count. The Ecker closed the distance, their ranks a formidable wall of muscle and metal, but the humans did not waver. As the aliens came within range, Briggs gave the order, and a storm of bullets and rockets erupted from the human positions. The front line lit up with muzzle flashes, the air filled with a deafening roar of combat. Ecker soldiers fell in droves, their armor pierced by concentrated fire. Explosions rocked their war machines, sending twisted metal and alien limbs flying. The humans fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their resolve unbreakable. Private Jackson, despite his injury, fired with grim determination. His leg throbbed with every movement, but he ignored the pain, focusing on the task at hand. Each shot felt like a small victory, each fallen alien a step closer to survival. Sergeant Morales, bloody but unbowed, led a countercharge against a breached section of the line. His men followed with a ringing cry, pushing the Ecker back with sheer force of will. The ground was slick with blood, the air filled with the stench of death, but the humans did not falter. Keenox watched the battle unfold, his confidence eroding with each passing moment. The humans were supposed to be weak, easy prey for the might of the Ecker, yet here they stood unyielding, their spirit unbroken. He realized with a sinking feeling that they had underestimated these creatures. The battle raged on, a brutal testament to the resilience and tenacity of the human spirit. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, both sides fought with everything they had, neither willing to give an inch. In the heart of the chaos, Captain Briggs knew one thing for certain. They would fight until their last breath for their home, for their people, and for the hope of a future free from alien tyranny. The battle raged for hours, a relentless storm of violence and defiance. The humans, outgunned and outnumbered, fought with a tenacity that defied reason. Captain Briggs and his men stood as the last bulwark against the Ecker onslaught, their spirits unbroken despite the overwhelming odds. As noon approached, the battlefield was a nightmarish landscape of smoke, fire, and twisted metal. Both sides had suffered heavy losses, but the Ecker continued to press forward, their determination matched only by the humans' unyielding resolve. Keenox, observing from his command post, grew increasingly frustrated. The humans' resilience was unlike anything he had encountered. He needed to break their spirit once and for all. With a decisive gesture, he ordered his elite guards forward, massive, heavily armored Ecker warriors known as the Iron Fist. The Iron Fist advanced with brutal efficiency, their armored forms impervious to conventional fire. They smashed through the human lines, their sheer power overwhelming. Captain Briggs saw the threat and knew they needed a desperate plan. Morales, take your men and flank those behemoths. We need to hit them where it hurts. Briggs commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos. Sergeant Morales nodded and rallied his remaining men. They moved swiftly, using the debris and trenches for cover, and maneuvered around the battlefield to flank the Iron Fist. The massive aliens were focused on the front lines, oblivious to the threat closing in from the side. Now, Morales shouted, and his men unleashed a barrage of explosives and concentrated fire. The Iron Fist, caught off guard, staggered under the assault. One by one, they fell, their invincible facade shattered by the humans' relentless ingenuity. Briggs watched with a mix of pride and relief as the Iron Fist were brought down, but the battle was far from over. Keenox, furious at the turn of events, ordered a full-scale assault, throwing everything he had into a final push. The ground trembled as war machines and soldiers surged forward, determined to crush the human resistance. But the humans, battered and exhausted, stood firm. With one last desperate push, Captain Briggs and his men unleashed everything they had. Rockets, bullets, and grenades filled the air. The battlefield became a maelstrom of destruction. The Ecker ranks began to falter. Keenox realized, too late, that the battle was lost. The humans had done the impossible. As the Ecker forces retreated, their war machines burning and their dead littering the battlefield, Captain Briggs stood amidst the carnage, his rifle heavy in his hands. The cost had been immense, but they had won. They had proven that humanity was not so easily conquered. Keenox, watching from the safety of his retreating command ship, clenched his fists. This was not over. The humans had won today, but the war was far from finished. As the dust settled and the smoke cleared, Captain Briggs looked to the horizon, knowing that this was just the beginning. Humanity had stood against the tide and held firm. They would fight on no matter the cost, because that was who they were. They were survivors,